Hi, my name is Kirk, and I am the host of the Literary Canon Club. And I'm often asked why we should read the canon, the great canon of literature at all. Why these books? Why is it important to read literature? Why can't I just, listen to audiobooks or watch television? All things that I don't have any problem with. But today I wanted to give you 3 reasons why I think it's important for you to read the Western literature canon, period. Why we should read the canon at all, why it's important to you, whether or not you decide to join the Literary Canon Club. Now, just so you know, the Literary Canon Club meets monthly, has lots of perks, including motivational emails, coaches to help keep you on track of your reading. And there's a group that we're building a community so we could do this together to help you read through this canon list because it can be a little daunting on your own. But whether or not you use the Literary Canon Club or you just read these books or you're thinking about reading these books, I wanted to just give you a couple of reasons why I think you should take the journey into the literary canon. Now, there's a lot of question about why the canon, why these particular books. And I'm going to leave that subject aside for a second, except to say, because they are the greatest books ever to be written in literature, in the world, but in particularly in the West. If we say that these are the greatest works, the most influential works, these are the works that not only me, Kirk Barbera, who's been reading literature all my life, but many people through thousands of years who have studied literature say that these are the greatest. Now, you may say, I don't want to take their word for it. Then read the list, right? Read it for yourself to find out. Okay, but let's get into what you get from reading great literature, period. Why it's important, and in particular, the canon. So the first reason is aesthetic pleasure. Aesthetic pleasure. Now, this may seem kind of odd that you can get pleasure, like the idea of pleasure from reading in particular. But I think we may all have had some similar experiences, even if you're not a deep reader right now. Or even if you are, you probably know what I'm talking about. But anybody who's read any novel that they've enjoyed knows what I'm talking about. You have a pleasure not only in accomplishing it, but in playing with those characters in your mind, with seeing those characters, with reading the pages. Sometimes we put it in terms of, I didn't want the story to end, right? I closed the last book of Harry Potter or whatever, and I wish the story continued. That's a kind of a sign of aesthetic pleasure. I will say that there is an elevated form of aesthetic pleasure, that it's not just what is the most easiest to attain, that as you get more and more from a childhood up to adulthood and into, the last stages of your life, that your pleasure should get more intense, should get better, more and more of it should be pleasure. But I will also say that it's not automatic. It's not something that happens just randomly, that, if you just read any novel, that's the same novels that you've read before, just in different names. It's the same kind of thriller, the same kind of fantasy. Eventually, that gets boring. And part of reading the canon is that it elevates your ability to get more pleasure from more challenging, great works, like what's in the literary canon, like reading the Iliad, the Odyssey, Dante, Shakespeare, Tolstoy, Virgil, all these characters, all these writers, and more, and hundreds of more who are maybe not great or as influential yet, but are still very good and worth reading. So aesthetic pleasure, I will quote here Harold Bloom: reading well is one of the great pleasures that solitude can afford you. And I truly believe that it used to be long ago, decade, 100 years ago or so, that it was a testament of a man's inner flourishing world if he could be locked away for some period of time and be completely fine with himself, absolutely okay. And that inner world, that you're able to go in solitude and not sing your ohms and your meditate and clear your mind, but live a fantastic world. to imagine things, to draw inspiration from the works that you've read, and to combine them in unique ways in your mind. That's part of what solitude after reading the great canon will afford you. Not maybe, it will afford you that. It will build that within you. So aesthetic pleasure is number one. Now, another less pleasurable thing maybe, but a practical reason to read the canon, and I'll say to join the club as well, is that it will help you to build a reading habit. Even if you're a reader, sometimes you need help being on track, keeping on track. I mean, how many times have you picked up a great book and put it down, or it took you 8 months or a year? In our club, for one advantage of taking the actual club and becoming a paying member, is that we will truncate that time, and we will, in a sense, force you to read the Iliad in 2 months rather than 8, 9, 10, 12, 14 months. The Iliad and these great works should not be read over long stretches of time. Even books like War and Peace, you're not getting as much out of it if you take 2 years to read that book, because you will have no idea what happened in the first half of that book when you read the second half, the second year. You have to, your first time in particular, you have to read it on a consistent basis and kind of be able to retain it. The Iliad, for just as an example, the Iliad and the Odyssey would have been sung out loud to an audience of people sitting down on like hard stone seats for 2 days. And they would do the whole 15,000 plus lines. So humans can do this. It does take a little bit of effort. Now, I'm not suggesting you do that much. We give you 2 months to read this. We help you break down, it's basically 50 pages a week and you're good to go, right? That's it. But that does take a little bit of time. You need to, break it up into 2-3 chunks of 30 minutes. We give you tips and helps on how to do that if you join the the Literary Canon Club. So the one thing about that is a quote that I like from Francis Bacon: "Reading maketh a full man," and then it goes on, "conference a ready man, and writing an exact man." But the idea is reading makes a full man or woman, right? And what he's saying here is that if you don't read, I take that fullness to be, you're literally not as full. You're not living as full of a life. You only have so many experiences that are humanly possible to you living in the 21st century. You cannot be a Greek warrior. You cannot be a sailor. You cannot be, you cannot deal with the heavens and have a great, rebellion against God. There's just so many things you cannot do. And those are just some of the big ones. There's lots of little things. You can't be, a 14th century charlatan, right? You can't be a knight in the 8th century AD. You can't do those things. It's just not possible. You can pretend, you could do things, but by reading the canon, you live a fuller life because you can live vicariously through their experiences. And this is something that we talk quite a bit about in the club, but it's one of the major reasons to read the great canon, the literary canon. Okay, now the third reason to read the canon, I think probably the most important and the one that you can spend the most time talking about. And there's so much, and besides maybe number one, aesthetic pleasure, there's so much to be said about developing your conscious mind. This is something that philosophers have talked about for a long, long time, about the power of literature and what it does for you and why it's unique, from Plato and Aristotle all the way down to modern writers today. And one of the important reasons I think you should read great literature with elevated, challenging, it all feels impossible to understand language, like a Shakespeare or, even a Dostoevsky, language that's separated, and it's not exactly the way we experience language today, or even of their own time. When Shakespeare was writing in the, in his era, he was not writing the exactly the way that people spoke at that time. And I wanted to give you a quote from a linguist here for this. And this is from Richard Mitchell. And he says, "Language is the medium in which we are conscious. The speechless beasts are aware, but they are not conscious. To be conscious is to know with something. And a language of some sort is the device with which we know. More precisely, it is the device with which we can know. And we don't have to. Consciousness has degrees. We can be wide awake or sound asleep. We can be anesthetized. But the point is that language and developing your consciousness go hand in hand. The more you're astute at language, the better you're capable of understanding the world. And I don't just mean vocabulary. Vocabulary is one minor part. I mean metaphor, simile, analogy. I mean the connotation, the emotions that a word or words or phrases bring out, and the denotation, the specific definition of a word, and the infinite amounts of ways that you can use to describe a person, a scene, a world. All those things are critical for developing your conscious mind, which makes you better able in the real world to adapt, to understand, to comprehend, to grasp what's going on in your life, in your relationships, in your love life, in your business relationships, in your long-range thinking, in politics, in culture, and so many things. It all comes down to language. Language is what we use to know the world through our conscious mind. It is the medium. And so reading great works of literature really develops that, and it expands it, and helps you to understand the world that you live in and the world around you. Okay, so those are the three main reasons. I won't even call them main reasons, because there are so many other reasons that you can have, like you get to deal with the great themes of all time, fate, free will, all types of philosophical questions embodied in physical characters. And you can actually see them play themselves out in ways that are very useful for you to understand the world that you live in. There's just so many reasons to read the literary canon with or without the Literary Canon Club, but we are here to help you do all of those things. So check us out. We are on the Troubadour Magazine website. So you can go to troubadourmag.com and you'll see Literary Canon Club, or you can go to troubadourmag.com/Literary Canon Club. And if you just type that into Google, it'll figure it out. But that's what we're all about. So check us out and enjoy. And you can learn all about the club itself, including what we read, what we recommend to read, and some frequently asked questions on this URL. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you in the club.